Hello and welcome back to another episode of Braver New Worlds, a podcast about the stories we need to tell for the future we want to see. My name is Nathan Young. I am your host. Today's conversation is with Alexandra Peek, and she's an herbalist, an energy worker, a former client tech and environmental policy professional, and she's been rethinking what change really looks like from her point of view. We met recently at a conference, and she had done a seminar there about her environmental policy and advocacy work that she'd been doing. And I was just very intrigued by what she talked about there and about the community organizing aspect of the work that she had been doing there. And so I knew I wanted to have her on the podcast. But as I do with all these podcasts, I talk to people on the phone first. And in that conversation, she started telling me about how she'd been moving into more of the healing and wellness work that she's made more of a focus of her work right now. But she's also sort of that still ambitious person that was involved in like the environmental tech and advocacy work before. And so a lot of the healing work that she's doing now, it's much more built around community-based models of organizing and wellness care that brings modern medicine and ancestral practices and like just a more holistic view of what it means to care for the people in the community in a more connected and progressive, humanistic sort of way. And so that's a lot of what we talk about. It's just that transition for her, like how she made that transition, what it's looked like, and like what her new work is all about. And I want to offer up sort of two questions that came up for me in this episode. And one is about where we can affect the most change. Like how important is it to be working at that 50,000 foot policy level and the technical innovation level versus operating on, the systems and opportunities that we have available much more on the ground roots level, and being able to help people one-on-one directly where we're at. And I kind of have this presumption that like a lot of the big change happens up high and then it trickles down. But part of her argument is that it starts at the ground and goes up. And I'm curious to hear what you all think about that too. And as Alexandra is going to share in here, she has a lot of really interesting and important initiatives that she's activating in her own community. And so I'm always sort of intrigued when I hear about these things, like how replicable are they to other communities? Like could the type of things that she's doing in El Paso, Texas, could those work in other places like San Diego or wherever, all of you are that are listening to this right now? And I'd be curious to hear anybody's thoughts on that too. And then, another big part of our conversations, we just really get into the human side of what it means to create change in our world and the challenges that come with that and the way that we relate to it on an identity level. And if you know about the type of work I do, I talk about that identity piece a lot and how we perceive ourselves. So I thought that was very interesting to have that conversation with Alexandra here too. So if you're somebody that's like, kind of questioning your path and you're wondering what is going to really create change in our world and how to affect that on different levels, I think you'll get a lot out of this podcast. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Alexandra Peek, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Nobody's here. It's just you and me.
Thank you for having me on Braver New Worlds podcast. Super excited to be here.
Cool. All right. So I always like to start off these podcasts by just having you introduce yourself a little bit in your own words so people can understand a little bit about who you are.
Okay, sure. So my name is Alexandra Peek, no middle name. I am based in El Paso, Texas, Southwest area, closer to being New Mexico than Texas. I am a trained herbalist. I work in death work with hospice, and I also do holistic energy healing as well as nervous system regulation and reflexology. So all that you can mix into well-being. So that's a little bit about me.
So I'll kind of like level set like how we met is I met you at the community-centric fundraising family reunion in San Diego, and you had given a talk seminar about environmental advocacy. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And so I was like super intrigued by that. I was like, oh, I got to talk to her. I got to get her on the podcast. I just liked the way that you presented the challenge and the issue and the way you talked about it. But then when we started talking on the phone, basically you told me that like you're sort of moving away from that and you've gotten into this more into healing modalities and these models of care. And then the reason you gave me for that was so fascinating. So then I was like, all right, well, like now, like there's even more to talk about. So I was like, yeah, let's do this. So maybe let's start by, I don't know, can you give a little bit of a Cliff Notes version of like that transition for us, kind of get us going?
Yeah.
Or is there a Cliff Notes version, or is this
I know, I'm like trying in my mind to like condense it. So yes, I remember meeting you at CCF. I was
Mhm.
there giving a case study on data centers and climate
That's right.
justice. I am part of an organization called Liberarte. We nurture artists all over the world that are co-creating a new future. So that's why I was
Mhm.
situated at CCF. I'm new to the nonprofit and philanthropy worlds. So that
Mm.
was my introduction to y'all. And cliff notes of my, I guess, transition in my work is I spent a decade working in law, clerical administration, and then
Mhm.
climate tech. And then I would do community organizing around environmental and climate justice. And after all that time, it just felt like I was hitting a brick wall and
Mm.
moving in circles with that work where I wasn't seeing the impact and the progress on my people, on the
Mhm.
environment, on policies. And then, due to circumstances in my own personal life, I realized that I wasn't seeing the impact because the work is actually internal more than external. And that just led me
Mm.
through a whole life journey and transition that had me understand the issues invertly.
Okay. And so, yeah, there's like so many threads I want to pull on that one there. So I'm curious, was that like, how smooth was that transition? Was that like just kind of like, oh, I'll just kind of get into this? Or was that like complete identity crisis, like multiple nights crying, wondering like, what the hell am I doing to myself type transition?
You hit the nail on the head. It's exactly what you said as the latter. It
Okay.
was a
Okay.
bumpy road. I did not
Hmm.
want to accept that life was shaking up my world. And I didn't want to
Hmm.
accept that the identity I had so pridefully built upon actually was a house of cards. And
Mm.
it took a lot of strength
Hmm.
and tears and reflections to realize that I
Yeah.
was holding on to something that I actually didn't want and it wasn't actually who I
Mm.
was.
Mhm.
But honestly, the just letting go part was the hardest part because once I did, I was like, why didn't I do that way earlier? So
What part were you most afraid of letting go?
the identity I had built,
Mhm.
since I was young, I'm sure each of us has a story of what our parents
Mhm.
told us that we should be when we grow up based on
Mhm.
like characteristics that we see of
Mhm.
us as children. And the characteristic that my mom decided to really hold on to was I was meant to be a lawyer and I was meant to be like
Mm.
changing laws. And
Mhm.
I still will pin that, still will happen, but
Mhm.
not in the way that we're told it's
Yeah.
supposed to come about. So really it was letting go of an identity that had been cultivated for me from people close to me. And what really led to like the collapse of that was the loss of the people in my life that held that identity. And once they were no longer around me, then it made an echo chamber where I was like, okay, I
Mm.
don't have these people reflecting back at me what they told me I should be all my life. And suddenly I
Mhm.
don't really recognize myself anymore. So who am I? And that kind of just started the rest of the journey.
Interesting. Like, so did you kind of imagine yourself as this like legal badass in like the pantsuits and like all of that? Is that like what it
Yeah.
was for you?
Have you seen or has anyone seen Suits on Netflix
Yeah. Yeah. I've watched a couple
with
episodes.
Harry
Yeah.
Spencer? Like I
Mhm.
thought I was gonna
Mhm.
be like a Jessica, the way that she is in that
Okay.
show. Just
I
coming
actually
in
have
and all
no idea what the
badass.
characters' names are,
Oh, I
but
love Suits. Yes.
yeah. Okay. What was the actress that played Jessica? That's not Meghan Markle, right? That's
No,
the
but
only
she
actress I
was
know
in
in that
there as
show.
Rachel, and I love her character as well. Yeah, they're both savvy, they just come in kind of like a Law
Hmm.
and Order show where it's very dramatized. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
definitely the image I had.
Okay. And yeah, so you wanted to be that, and then
Yeah.
you're like, nah, now I'm an herbalist. Like,
Yeah, like I wanted to be that and I kind of got it in a way. Like I discontinued law, but as I mentioned, I picked up climate tech worlds. And
mhm.
in those rooms, I was kind of that person because I was responsible for evaluating the environmental and human impacts of the climate tech, more specifically decarbonization technologies like direct air capture was a big
Mhm.
one, or DAC. And I had to go into these rooms. Sometimes they were with policymakers and be like, this is
Mhm.
X, Y, and Z from our research and put forward a case. So
Mhm.
in some ways I did become that. And when I was in that top of my field, working in New York, making six
Mhm.
figures at only 26, doing all this
Oh wow.
work,
Yeah.
I my life was empty on the inside. Like I just couldn't see the impacts. There was like I was
Mm.
doing all these, quote unquote things that are markers for success, but people
Yeah.
around me were still suffering. carbon emissions were still increasing.
Mm.
The biggest ecological disasters were still happening. So I was like, what world am I actually making an impact when these things are accelerating? I'm supposed to be, putting a pin in it or like putting holes in it in some way. And I didn't see that.
Yeah. Okay. And was the environmental piece, was that kind of like always a very deliberate part of it, that where you wanted to be in that kind of work, or did that just kind of what you ended up in? And
It did because, so in El Paso, I grew up near the Asarco American smelting plant. It has now
okay.
been retired, but I, as a child, it was active, and me and my cousins would be playing around the tower, like playing around that area because that's just
Yeah.
what you did. It was around here. Fast
Mhm.
forward 15 years later, all these environmental hazards came out, all these research papers. A lot of people got environmental cancer where
Mhm.
I lived. And that just made me question, okay, what is safe in our environment? What was placed here purposely
Yeah.
for who and for what gain and whose
Mhm.
disadvantage? And that really propelled me was the education part once I was in college.
Yeah. Tell me about that. You like went to college and you learned about the environmental education, and
Yes.
then you followed the mandates of your elders and became a lawyer, or the expectations of your elders, became a lawyer. It sounds like what I'm hearing is that just sort of felt like that was always a sort of predetermined path on some level. Yes? No?
It was, yeah, I would definitely call it like the track I was on was fate,
Mhm.
and I've changed it to destiny, is my analogy for that.
Yes, let's talk about the destiny then. What's the destiny?
The destiny's still in progress,
Mhm.
but it's really to rebuild the world in a conscious way.
Mhm.
So I remember something that I learned when I was doing a lot of healing was that psychology shows that 95% or more of our conscious waking thoughts and our emotions are ruled by the subconscious mind. And
Mhm.
the subconscious mind is the ruler. Like the conscious mind cannot override it because the conscious mind understands information in language and the subconscious understands it in visuals and
Mhm.
emotions. So that's how you code information on the subconscious. Most people are not aware of their subconscious mind. The people writing
Mhm.
the laws, the people creating the
Mhm.
statutes, the people that are governing structures, they literally are not of sound mind. They do
Mhm.
not know
Mhm.
themselves. So they're being ruled by something that has been suppressed for a very long time. And when
Mhm.
I learned that statistic, I knew I didn't want to be ruled by something else. I wanted to
Mhm.
discover and be in full faculty of who I was. And that is a difference between fate and destiny. Carl Jung has that perfect quote, until you make the unconscious conscious, you will call fate's destiny. Or there's like some quote from him that says that. And it's
Yeah.
true. You will be ruled by the unconscious thought, thinking it's destiny when it's actually fate. And so that
Mhm.
really
Mhm.
was, a marker
Oh
for
yeah.
me to be, I want to be in control consciously of what I'm doing because I know myself fully. And I want
Mhm.
someone like this to be ruling, creating rules, creating structure, not those
Mhm.
that are
Mhm.
living like zombies.
Yeah. I actually have a sort of similar frame that I talk about in my work too, and I very similar, but it's like different. But I talk about like storytelling in relation to trauma, and how we're
Mm.
basically all living like trauma stories. Essentially, it sounds like very similar things, but kind of just different ways of phrasing it and like expressing it. But yeah, because like our bodies, our cognitive mind works, or our unconscious, or our mind sort of processes information in the context of stories, but we hold it in our body, as feelings or lived, experiences, or in our nervous system. I'm like babbling for some reason here. But yeah, we're
All
holding it
good.
in our body, we're holding it all in our
Understand.
body and our nervous system. And basically like the story that like we're telling ourselves stories to make sense of it, but our body's in like panic mode at all times. And so we're operating from a place of trauma, of like scarcity, of thinking that like we could be, we have to be fighting every chance we get, or we have to be running or every chance we get. And all those fight, flight, freeze, fawn instincts manifest into our current world as like overworking and fighting and combativeness and people pleasing, and either like, or just crashing out, or all these things. We're kind of oscillating between these extreme ways of operating, and then we tell ourselves stories to make sense of it as our own way of doing it. So now I'm curious if I heard you right. It sort of sounds like you had the revelation that like, okay, I'm trying to get these like traumatized people, or people that are operating from their subconscious but think they're like hyper conscious, trying to get them to think about the environment differently. And it's just not going to happen. They're never going to do this. They're always going to be operating from that like trauma body, subconscious motivations. And like, where did you feel like you were in that? Did you kind of understand yourself and like realize it, or like, how did it reveal itself to you that maybe you were that way also?
It really happened when I was in New York City, and I was living there for 3 years. And like I said, I was at the top of that type of career. And my mother had passed away not that long
Mm,
ago, and her death is really what started like the domino effect of everything. And there's those tiers of needs. I forget what the pyramid is, but it's like once you have your basic
yeah.
needs met, then the mind can start to, or the person can start to process higher needs, right? So I was in
Mhm.
a place that was safe. I was making a lot of money. I was comfortable. And so then everything came up because I was now safe. So
Yeah, yeah.
now, those needs had been met. So it was really like a slow turn of like, okay, now let me deal with all the traumatic things that have happened in my life that
Mhm.
I've never had the space to process
Yeah.
until this moment. And that really is what catapulted me to where I am now.
Okay. Yes, there was a real like inciting incident. Sounds like. I mean, were these type of things you sort of understood from almost like, I hate to say it, but like almost like a hobby perspective or a casual perspective before, and then when it came up, you really dug deeper?
Yes, there were always moments that were trying to wake me up, right? There was,
Hmm.
people that were close to me that passed. Death has been a big transformation of my life because so many people close to me have passed. When, that would happen, there was a lot of triggers. It would happen after 2020 or
Hmm.
2016 with the election. So there were like
Hmm.
moments where part of me was like, okay, so there's something else deeper asking me to reflect this. And I didn't want to deal with it. So it kind of just was a slow burn until,
Hmm.
2021, like I said, when I moved to New York, that I kind of had no choice. But it was definitely
Hmm.
it was there a years before, but I didn't fully focus in on it until around
Hmm.
2022.
And is it like your hope that this will come back around and have like that impact on that environmental work more than what you're doing before? Is that kind of in your mind, or is this more like my energy is just better spent here, period, and I'm walking away from the environmental work?
I feel like the environmental work is intricate to who I am as a person. So
Mm-hmm.
my very community and what I do is already introduced to the climate work. For example, there is a group of composters, a neighborhood
Mm-hmm.
composting group called Dirty Girls Compost. And I know, I love the name. And they have been doing this also since 2019, just composting their neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
outside their neighborhood. Now they have a full year-round garden to give that food from the
Mm-hmm.
compost back to that community. And I've been
Cool.
able to plug in to start extending it just because we know each
Mm-hmm.
other and now I'm back home. So I am now seeing that impact that I was searching for when I was in
Mm-hmm.
those ivory towers, so to say. Now I'm seeing the effects on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that is how real change happens. It happens when the material condition of people is changed in real,
Mm-hmm.
tangible ways to their reality. And when that happens in pockets and that joins together, that can create a flood. So to
Okay.
me, I am still in that work because I am constantly in contact with my environment, and the people that I live with, my community is in contact with the environment.
Hmm. And how much do you think that like now that you're on the ground and you're seeing it,
Hmm.
and it seems like much more of an impact, but like if you were to try and level set that somehow, do you feel like you're actually like legitimately having more impact here than maybe you were in trying to do more policy oriented work
Definitely doing
higher up the
more
line?
impact now. And I say that
Okay.
because I was just in those rooms where the quote unquote policies were being
Mm-hmm.
changed and written, and it was maybe like a sentence would be changed in one huge
Mm-hmm.
law every time there was a Texas legislator, and maybe not even then.
Mm-hmm.
So the progress that I was seeing was so incremental, and then you had to deal with the enforcement on the ground
Mm-hmm.
versus communities like mine that we live on the outskirts, on the margins. There is the law and then there is what is done. And we create our own world here
Mm-hmm.
because the enforcement is so lax and nonchalant about environmental work.
Mm-hmm.
So, it just reminds me again about the civil rights movement that I even brought up in the
Mm-hmm.
presentation that we met on is, yeah, the law follows the action. The law follows
Mm.
action. I truly believe that. And the civil rights movement was a huge, real impact, real world example of
Mhm.
that. And I do think increasingly with enough communities having sovereignty over their
Mhm.
food and their energy sources, the law is going to have to keep up.
Okay. Well, yeah. And then can you outline, like, do you have a well thought out sort of theory of the case of like how those dots or those dominoes all fall to create that change? Like, can you spell that out more for us, or do you have that in your
What do you
head?
mean? Like,
Well, yeah. Like, how does I'm very curious. And this might be like, a lot to ask, so it's okay to be like, I'm actually not sure, but just, yeah, like by doing this work on the ground and like
mm-hmm,
you're doing food sovereignty,
mm-hmm,
you're doing energy sovereignty, like, but at the same time, I know like in El Paso's like giant like data centers getting plugged
yeah,
in and like
mm-hmm,
creating water shortages, and like these data centers are making all this pollution. And you're in Texas where I don't know what it's actually like in Texas, but in California we have the impression that's like very lawless as far as regulations
mm,
go. And so I guess, so I'm curious, like, if you have a sort of theory of the case for how, what you're doing right now is like the first domino towards massive change on those things, or
mm-hmm,
or even if that's kind of like how you see it. And if
mm-hmm.
it's more like, no, we can't control that, but we can control this or
I
something
see.
else. And
Understand more. Yes. So my theory of change
mm-hmm,
is yes, pockets of sovereignty, which means pockets of communities who take up upon themselves to fulfill their own needs that are
mm-hmm,
external to the state apparatus,
mm-hmm,
then create a system that works in parallel with the state legislator. For example, in Socorro, so I live in the municipality, one of the outskirts municipality of El Paso called Socorro, Texas. And I am also on Tigua reservation land. So the house that I am occupying is a house that my grandfather built in the 70s when he immigrated from Mexico. And we
mm-hmm,
landed in this very interesting spot where our zip code is governed by the city of El Paso, but also by the tribal lands. And
okay,
because my grandfather built in a certain time period of the house, we got grandfathered into the tribal lands, even
mm-hmm,
though we don't carry tribal cards.
mm-hmm,
But it is in this weird crossroads of place that my community is situated. And so when it comes to building food sovereign corridors, which is what,
mm-hmm,
we have here in Socorro, where literally we have a 5-acre farm that feeds into Bodega Loya, a local food stand, and that we're connecting that to the compost, which is in a different jurisdiction of El Paso,
mm-hmm,
we're able to kind of operate underneath the radar of the state because we're in this gray area. My
mm-hmm,
theory of change is once this dominoes into several different neighborhoods coalescing to create these food sovereignty corridors, we then
mm-hmm,
need leaders that are going to overrule it, talk on our behalf,
mm-hmm,
and that can create our own party, our own system of government. Just like there's your own tribal government that's separate from the
mm-hmm,
Socorro government, that's separate from the city of El Paso government.
mm-hmm.
And if enough municipalities and people are voting in support of these representatives for these types of work, then they're the ones that have equal footing and power when it comes to the
Mm-hmm.
city and state of El Paso. If
Yeah.
this model was to be, taken to other places that live in that
Mm-hmm.
gray area, then that would literally create an external apparatus, representative apparatus that's separate from the state but has the same power. And it has the same
Mm-hmm.
power because there is people investing into it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. I'm curious, like, what are the factors that make that possible there? Because as you're saying that, one of the things that comes up for me is like in San Diego, access to land
Mm-hmm.
is difficult, And I'm guessing on some level, like maybe you've got more access to land in El Paso. I could be wrong, but maybe on the flip side, maybe water is more scarce there. Or I don't know, maybe not, or just the growing conditions aren't quite the same where you're at. And so I don't know, what do you feel like are the things that are really going for you as far as building this out and creating this in your community? And what do you think like are the challenges that are like unique to your area that are coming up?
Yes, the opportunities right now are really land. So
Mm-hmm,
like I said, Socorro, most of us that are here, it's because our grandparents, our great grandparents already came to settle
mm-hmm,
the land. And that's back then where people were granted large swaths of land. They would just come over,
mm-hmm.
plant there, and that was your land. So me and my neighbors, we sit on a lot of land that's just ours. The 5-acre farm that I told you about, that is not uncommon in my area. So an advantage is that we own our land. And if we want to combine, like if neighbors want to combine forces on a land-based project, they have the right to just do that. That isn't limited. We are in the desert. So, of course, what can be planted, we're in the Chihuahuan Desert, what can be planted and thriving here is very limited compared to other places. And if we are going to grow crops, which the city of El Paso was a big cotton yielder back in the 90s, which is crazy because cotton needs a lot of water.
Yeah.
And now our Rio Grande is basically dried. By the time we get here, we are rationed a lot more when we get irrigated. So now that cotton industry is gone. The last 5 years, it's gone. So what we plant has to be very strategic. And that's when trading partnerships in New Mexico down to Mexico, California would be very important because just like tribal indigenous people did thousands of years ago, what you don't have here, you trade up and down.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm hearing like a very hyper localized approach to.
Yes. And that's how it has to start. I mean, if you even think about the 13 colonies, how they started, they were very localized powerhouses that then united. What happens now is we have become so centralized and our resources are siphoned from this central body that doesn't give reciprocal representation or protection. So yes, it is very on purpose that I am talking about it as a localized way, because it is in local power that then comes together in reciprocal relationships where we then can start moving the wheel in the other direction.
Yeah. As much as I love doing this podcast, sad truth of it all is that doesn't pay the bills. It actually costs me money to make this podcast. That's okay. I love doing it, so we're doing it. So what does pay the bills for me is I help individuals and organizations leverage the power of storytelling for leadership and persuasion. This is the work I do, and I want to tell you about it real quick here. For organizations, a lot of times the work is very much focused on fundraising for nonprofits or developing a narrative strategy for the important messages that they want to get out in their campaigns. It can also be about developing leadership and communication skills amongst the team that you've already got working within your organization. For individuals, a lot of my work revolves around helping develop a narrative-based communication approach for those high-leverage career moments that come up from time to time, like giving a public talk, interviewing for a new position, integrating into a new role at a new company, or making the leap for yourself to jump into entrepreneurship and how you talk about the work that you do with the external audiences there too. These are very much the moments that can have a huge impact on your career. And by utilizing storytelling and narrative, you can not only communicate a more resonant message about what it is you're doing, but also one that's going to stick. So if this is intriguing to you and you want to know more, you can check out my website, storycultureconsulting.com. I'll have a free tool on there that's available for download, or you can check out the show notes too. I'll have the same tool down there that you can grab too. Once again, that's storycultureconsulting.com. And now back to the show. I'm curious to if you could paint more of a picture of this community too, because how many of you are there, and how much of your food are actually be able to pull from the land, and how well are you all working together? Because I know these things, they sound nice, right? But then there could be tensions and conflicts and things you got to work out with each other, or things still quite aren't working, or you got to pull in resources from, you still got to go to Costco once a week or something. I don't know, what, how is, I don't know, can you paint the picture of the community for us a little bit in that regard, or?
Sure. I'm not really sure what the question is asking. So yeah, I live in Socorro. We're about, what are we now? About 30K. We're large.
Okay.
Then you have the tribal lands. I believe they're half of that. I mean, our neighborhood is less connected than it was before. I remember when my grandmother was around, everyone just knew more because they were fresh immigrants. Now, generationally, we become more Americanized. So a lot of the Mexican indigenous culture has been lost, but also I am seeing a resurgence in my generation and then the generation behind me, who have been the leaders in, I'm saying, these farms and creating the composting. So this is very much like the generation me and Gen Z that is resurging that. Conflicts, not any that stand out.
Okay.
I think it's really more like a cultural divide that's happening where you'll have
Mm,
my parents' generation and older who have been Americanized because they were so
mm,
stigmatized growing up that really are going away from any land-based type of medicine or
mm,
work. But you're
mm,
seeing this resurgence in heritage reclamation coming from
mm.
millennials and Gen Z. So I would say
Yeah.
that would maybe be the distinction, but that is also what's happening everywhere.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. It's like, is the community like what? How much of the community is on board with this, or is it something like a small group of you are doing, or is there, a lot of the young people are engaged, where there's older people or other people like, what are you kids doing over there? Why are you bothering with that? Like, go get a job or something like that.
Yeah, I think people now are just craving something real. And when they
Mhm.
hear of the alternative, they're all for it. So honestly, the biggest
Yeah.
barrier is getting the word out. Like people in El
Hmm.
Paso are still surprised that Bodega Loya exists, that Dirty Compost Girls exists. Like they're thinking the stuff that happens in California. Those are things that happen in New
Hmm.
York. Those are things that happen in those cities, is
That's
what I'm
funny.
always told. That those are literally the
Yeah.
two cities always used as the barometer. Like that doesn't happen in El Paso. And I'm like, it's happening right here.
That's
So
so funny.
it's like, but once they hear about it, they're all for it. So honestly, it's just this belief that we can't have anything good. And
Hmm.
but once it's recognized that it's here in my views and what I've been seeing is people then invest.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting. Well, it's funny too that like, yeah, there's an assumption that that's happening in like California and New York
Yeah.
because I think I told you when we met, I watch all these YouTube channels of people in like, well, I guess like upstate New York, but
Mhm.
like also in
Mhm.
like Colorado and Nebraska and Michigan. And they just have like their small farm and they're filming, going around building like a food forest in their backyard, or they've got composting chickens and they've got all this stuff. And like, I'm sitting here in my suburban San Diego watching these videos thinking like, oh man, one of these days I'm going to move to one of those places and make my farm. And here you are, you're just doing it.
Trying, yes.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the other piece you told me about was the healthcare dynamic and like,
Yeah.
different models of care. And so you do like herbalism, energy healing, death care work, and how about like you've got all these modalities that you've been combining and
Mhm.
these collaboration models with other healthcare professionals. And so the impression I got is like people are coming to you, they've got something, and you're like trying to build some. It looks like some sort of system where if you need like a doctor, you go here, or if you need
Yeah.
Eastern medicine, you go here, psychiatrist, you go here, and you're working together with all these different modalities to help the people in your community. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, thanks for bringing this up. I am trying to create a model of integrative health. And this
Mm-hmm.
is after experiencing the American medical system
Mm-hmm.
firsthand and how frustrating that could be to go to one specialist who doesn't know what you need. Then they take you to another specialist, and the other specialist doesn't talk to the other specialist. And they just start treating you like you're parts instead
Mm-hmm.
of being a whole, complete human being. And the deep disadvantage of specialists is that then so much is missed, and then the true root of someone's ailments is never really addressed because
Mm-hmm.
there's so many different cooks in the kitchen cooking different recipes, not even working on the same recipe. So the aim of Asun Metzli is to really be that container for a mind, body, and soul integrative health, and the
Mm-hmm.
aim is to also be a very strong network for what already exists in El Paso. So El Paso does have Rota Care, which is one of the only free clinics, and they're only open on Saturdays. And then you have Texas Tech that has their student dental clinic, which has
Mm-hmm.
free to very low cost complete dental work for anyone.
Mm-hmm.
But again, there's limitations. So what I am really trying to do is if someone comes to see me, I'm not a dentist, but I can tell there's a lot of work that needs to be done with the teeth. I have a connector that they could get into Texas Tech at
Mm-hmm.
this rate or at this time where they
Mm-hmm.
could be locked in. Or hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
even just find more MDs that are willing to come in to extend their time at Rota Care, knowing that there's a
Mm-hmm.
connector that can meet them for other needs that they can't get done at Rota Care. So that is really the aim, is to just start treating people holistically, because a lot of people are unwell and
Mm-hmm.
the medical system really runs on sick care rather than health care.
Yeah. It almost sounds like the way you describe it, it's almost like kind of a holistic concierge that's for people that are like more on the margins or that just can't afford the like what most people would assume that you get from a concierge medicine provider, but like,
This is
but
true.
you're also willing to consider other modalities, as opposed
Yes,
to,
that's a big
yeah,
thing.
okay,
Yes, because I mean, the medical system is just it operates in a certain
hmm
type of medical philosophy and it doesn't
hmm
extend past that box. And in my experience and in many people's experiences, that then misses a lot of healing work that can be done. Doctors don't
hmm
like to talk about the properties of herbs. They don't like to talk
hmm
about energy work, although
hmm
MIT and Harvard have already shown studies on the effects of
hmm
Reiki, energy healing from Japan on the body and the mind. And then you have Eastern medicine going all the way from acupuncture, reflexology, etc., that have been healing people for thousands of years in this way
hmm
that have really just been brushed aside as alternative medicine when it has been
hmm
the medicine for people for thousands of years.
yeah,
So it is about introducing that back in.
yeah. And so, what does that day to day look like for you in this role? I mean, are you more of a practitioner then? Because it sounds like also like, somebody's got to go out there and find out what all those resources are, right? And somebody's got to like maintain relationships with all those different resources and opportunities to be able to refer people. I mean, is that part of what the role that you're playing also, or is this
Mm.
a system you've plugged into, or?
I mean, just like any entrepreneur will know, at the beginning, you're everything. You're your
Yeah.
marketing
hmm
team,
hmm
you're your HR, you're your outreach.
Yeah.
So yes, it is me doing all the hats right now. I am a
hmm
practitioner in that I have been trained in herbalism, do have certifications in neuroscience and nervous system
hmm
regulation,
hmm
reflexology, and soon to be Ayurvedic medicine. I'm going to India to go study that as well this
Okay.
year. So, yes, I also have, those modalities to blend that I'm doing
hmm
myself. And then on my side, I'm reaching out to sending emails, making connections,
hmm
having happy hours to see, okay, where can then the networking be for me to outsource what I cannot provide?
Yeah. Do you sleep then? Is how what
I get
happens?
a
How?
lot of good sleep.
Yeah, okay, good for you. Okay,
I
okay. Well,
do.
what's going through my mind right now? So, I'm very impressed with your ambition in general. Like that's a lot of what I'm hearing, and
I'm
and
glad to
it's
hear it.
it's so cool that on some level, and maybe I'm being presumptive here, but like on some level, like I get that impression you gave me of you in New York as like the lawyer
Oh,
was
yeah.
this very ambitious person, and now you've taken that same ambition and you're like applying it here, and not just in like, because I'm going to talk some smack right now, because there's a lot of people like in my area here that come from a more ambitious backgrounds too, and they become they'll become like a life coach or an energy healer or something like that, but they're not bringing the kind of community with it that you
Mm,
are, and that's what I'm finding intriguing, because it will be a little bit more of a, and like I don't know that necessarily that's like a bad thing that they're it's maybe self-serving, but like because we all have to have like a job, I guess.
right.
But like I'm just intrigued that you seem to be having a much more like community focused point of view, and I'm imagining that like that this model that you're creating, you're saying you're being entrepreneurial about it, but like I can't imagine it's creating like that much income for you necessarily either right now, at least like not all the connections, right?
Right.
uh, is there like, I mean, how much of this is just because like you're doing it because you want to and like because you want to feel good, or like do you sort of have a theory of like the business behind this,
Mm-hmm.
or do you have a lot of community support doing all this?
Mm-hmm. Yes, the sustainability, the internal sustainability
hmm
is still in
hmm
the works.
Okay.
And I think this is it. I do see
hmm
branches of
hmm
this, such as, like I said, having this external network, maybe in the future actually having a clinic. A
hmm
very close friend of mine, we met first year of college at UT, is an
hmm
MD. I also have
hmm
a lot of friends who are acupuncturists. So
hmm
this is very much will be a real clinic for someone to come in that's recognized, that's certified in all the ways that it needs
hmm
to be. So I do see the threads of how it's going to grow out. And this is the seeds that I'm planting for it. And this just feels like my life work. Like this feels like a life
Yeah.
purpose for me, despite the molasses feeling in the beginning. Honestly, what just makes
Yeah.
me do it is I feel free. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
I'm creating, and I'm creating something that is meaningful and very interesting, because I just
Mm-hmm.
imagine all the types of treatments and medicines that
Mm-hmm.
can be discovered when we're all working in unison from our own medicinal background and point of view. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that's ever really been done in modern times, is doing research and creating medicines from all these modalities together on certain ailments. And I would love to be a pioneer in that.
Yeah. I mean, so to what degree, like, did you kind of start doing this because you were interested and it seemed interesting to you versus like how intense was the need? And that was what spurred.
All the modalities I do now came about because I healed myself first.
Mm,
So all of these were ones that I worked on myself, that I trialed and erred, and I
mm-hmm,
took the knowledge and I converted it into wisdom. And as
mm-hmm,
wisdom goes, it's meant to be shared. So
mm-hmm.
all the modalities that I do now, it's because I personally went through it and I saw what it did.
I'm taking it all in.
Oh, take it
Just
in.
fascinating about well, and it's funny because I don't know. I love like when I get to talk to people like you because there's just so many different things that you're talking about, and I'm always like, oh, I want to ask about that. I want to ask about that. I want to ask about that. But then also, I'm like looking at the clock, so okay, we're kind of like
I
getting a little bit
know.
close here.
We could talk about this forever.
Yeah. Well, I guess I kind of want to zoom out now, and this I'm not sure exactly quite how to cue this up, but I noticed in like the notes that you sent me and things about like what we could talk about, this theme of like death and rebirth, like you had that in there a
Yeah.
lot,
Yeah.
and I don't know. I'm wondering if you could just like tell us what that's about for you and like how that's showing up in your work and your life and the way you're looking at the world right now.
Yes. So as I mentioned, death has a big role in the trajectory of my life, losing my parents, my grandparents, a close aunt, and then also the death of my identity of who I was going to
Mm-hmm.
be, the type of life I was going to live, and having all of that die. And then extrapolating that to the bigger world, our systems are dying. Our ways of living life, going to work, having family, like our family units, is all being transformed. So I think collectively we're being asked right now to embrace the death of what
Mm-hmm.
was. And I use the terminology the new earth often because we are in a new world. In
Mm-hmm.
this new world, it is no longer okay to poison and contaminate your neighbor for your
Mm-hmm.
gain. It's no longer
Mm-hmm.
okay. It's no longer okay to assault, hurt, or somebody else, no matter
Mm-hmm.
their race, gender, origins, and it's okay. A lot has changed for us. People online, people in community are calling it out as accountability, as
Mm-hmm.
healing, but I think it is just an overall signs that we are now in a new world. And now
Mm-hmm.
that we're in a new world, we need to let go of what no longer serves us collectively. And that goes back into death, and then scaling it back on a micro level. What does death mean for you? How have you experienced death? Because when you are in touch with your own mortality and how you want that to come about for you and others, then you really start to question what is living and what should life be and what should life look like. And that then goes back external to what type of systems and customs do we want to cultivate for the new world.
Yeah. I love it. Well, it's so interesting too, 'cause this is kind of how I got into this work also. I just want like, I always think about it again in like terms of like story and narrative. And I always felt like there was a set of narratives that were just on their way out.
Yeah.
And we haven't quite figured out what the new narratives are going to be yet. And part of why I wanted to do this podcast and these speaker series is like start talking about these new narratives. And like, you're just out there in El Paso doing it. It sounds like
It's perfect. The braver new worlds, because it does take courage and conviction.
Mm-hmm.
Because while the new world is here, there is still a lot of pockets where there is clinging
Mm-hmm.
on to the old status quo, and I still look
Mm-hmm.
crazy in certain rooms, and I still get like, what the heck, so it is very much having to trust in your inner knowing and have the courage to say and live a future that others still cannot
Mm-hmm.
see, but that you intimately sense. So it does take
Yeah.
a brave person to do that.
Yeah. Well, now I'm curious to ask you, like, what do you feel like, what are the biggest external and like internal pressures that you feel like pushing against you away from this or like, challenging your courage and your conviction in this?
External, it's finding like-minded folks, because this path has been isolating. I have had to let go of groups of people I belonged to, community that I was part of. And that isolation can be very trying. We're social beings. Human beings need other human beings. And to walk a path alone for a while really tests that inner strength. And then internally, back on what we've been saying this whole time, is like letting go of parts of yourself that you really attached yourself to because you were told to, programmed to, and then coming to a point where you're realizing that's not who I want to be anymore, or that no longer serves me. And that inner conflict of, what am I letting go within myself when that happens? Because, something about this path is it also has been a big sacrifice. And I think people that walk this understand that.
Yeah, that resonates with me too. I've definitely it's been a sacrifice in like terms of like sort of standard capitalistic commercial points of view of like life, for me at least.
Yeah, that's real.
I don't know. Is there other sacrifices that have come up for you, or like specifically?
Everything. I've had to sacrifice everything. Like I said, people I've been close to, where I was living, yes, like I've had to sacrifice everything. And I realize at the end of the day that I will have much better, and I am creating something much better. And sometimes something has to completely burn to the ground before that happens.
Yeah. What do you wish somebody had told you at like, some of those key inflection points, or before you, as you were thinking through these shifts for yourself? Is there anything that like you really wish somebody told you, or like you would want to go back in time and tell that old version of yourself?
I'm a person that prides myself on self-mastery, and I used to believe I had self-mastery when I absolutely didn't. So starting back to what I said at the beginning of our talk together, is that statistic of the subconscious mind ruling the conscious mind. If someone had told me back then, like, you have no control right now over how you feel, how you act, like actually your trauma is running you, that would have made me woken up real quick, because it was something that, I've always prided myself is that I am the full master of myself. And I definitely wasn't until recently.
Yeah. I get that. I wonder if there's a sort of, what is that thing, like the Dunning-Kruger effect, like the less you know, the more you think you know. So maybe it's one of those things, like the more you think you're in control, like the less you're actually in control. And like the more you're like, oh, I have no control. You probably have a lot more control than, somebody thinks they have a lot of control. Does that make sense? Did I say that right?
I think so.
Yeah. Well, no, that resonates too, because like I do a lot of, like in my work, I do some kind of coaching adjacent type work, and I bring up like the trauma stories and how like that's affecting a lot of us.
Yeah.
And I do share, like, I mean, I'm going to get gendered here. Like, men are much more resistant to this kind of point of view than women are. And when I talk about this, women are usually like, oh yeah, interesting. Yeah, they're very intrigued by this. And men are like, nah, I don't think that's it.
Why do you think that is?
Oh man, there's like so much there.
So much to unpack. Got it.
Yeah. Well,
give me the cliff notes.
I mean, I think on a certain level, like, men are I think we are very socialized towards a place of pride, and socialized to like think we know everything. I will say, like, I think about this a lot, and there's like, I could go on for another hour about this topic, but like, I think one of the things I've noticed is on a certain level, there are rewards for that, creating that point of view for yourself, like thinking you know everything as a man. Like it's going to work out for you to a certain degree, there will be a sort of psycho-spiritual backfire at some point, but until then, you're going to think you're flying high.
Right.
Especially if you're like a pretty intelligent, or like if you're smart enough to kind of get a good job in like white collar world, like that's not going to get challenged for, at least until you're like late 20s, and by then you might be doing pretty well. And like, then you're going to look at that system that you've been doing pretty well under and like question it.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of what comes up for me. And I see, the guys I do talk to in that situation, like there is a frustration they're dealing with, but it's hard to, it's like that identity piece too. It's the same thing. Like it's hard for them to like let go of that identity. And I don't think there are very many narratives of death and rebirth or renewal for men to follow. So
I hear that. For whoever's
Cliff notes.
listening,
I know.
who identifies as a male, maybe it's time for you to step up for that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Okay, Alexandra, this has been amazing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Pretty much like at the time here.
Yeah.
So let's see, if people want to find you, where can they go? I'll put some links in the show notes and everything too, but just, while we're here, where would you send people?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram, Azul Metzli, AZULMETZLI. Or reach out to me through email. Can also drop that in with the description box. But that's basically where I'm at.
Okay. Azul Metzli. What's Metzli? Azul's blue, right? So Metzli,
Yes.
What's Metzli?
Metzli is the Nahuatl indigenous word for moon. So
Okay.
Nahuatl is the culture that we associate with the Aztecs, but existed way before the Aztec Empire. I am mestiza, Mexican, indigenous and Spanish on my mom's side. And so part of the reclamation of that indigenous line is relearning Nahuatl. So Metzli means moon.
That's amazing. Cool. Well, Azul Metzli, and what was the other one?
You could just email me.
Okay. Cool. All right. And we'll put it in the show notes too.
Yes.
Alexandra, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Nathan.
This is great.
I
This is super fun.
appreciate this space for folks to come and share what they're creating. And thank you for the invite.
And just very grateful I met you at that conference. Thank you for going there and speaking about, your old career for all of us there.
I know. It's crazy how that's what we met, but that's why I was meant to say it. That's what I was meant to share it, is the connections I made.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's always the greatest part about those things, is just like you meet people and, it's fun. So
exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Alexandra.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Thank you so much to Alexandra Peek for coming on the show and sharing her story with us. I'd be curious to hear from some of you all about those questions I proposed at the beginning of, like, how do we balance high-level policy and innovation change with on-the-ground community work and community change? And where can one person have the most impact? I'm curious to hear thoughts on that. And also, what are some needs that you see in your community? How can they be addressed? What are the type of things that you really see people needing and wanting right where you're at? So another thing that struck me about this conversation is just this idea of, like, how so much of the change we're trying to create in the world really starts with ourselves and starts internally. And if we don't understand ourselves, we end up recreating the same systems that we want to change, just in our own, like, new egoistic version of it all too. So I thought that was really valuable. And then also, as obviously, like, the other big theme of this podcast was the idea of death and rebirth, and not just in the literal sense, but in the identities that we hold, the paths that we're on, and what we might need to let go of to really step into something more aligned for the future version of ourselves we want to grow into. So if this conversation resonated with you, I'd love it to hear from you, and I'd really encourage you to share it with someone else who you think might need to hear it. And you can find the full episode, show notes, and ways to connect with Alexandria in the description below on YouTube or on the show notes here if you're listening to some other podcast platform. And make sure that you are subscribed to Braver New Worlds so you don't miss future episodes like this. And thank you all for listening. We'll see you next time.